In Search of Great Stories presents
D-R-A-M-A drama.
Spoil the hell out of this movie.
What happened to the tow truck, Winston?
There's a lot of meta here. Let's get to watching great movies.
Welcome to Movielover22.
Hey there, folks. 'Tis the season to be spooky and whatnot, and everyone's getting together and talking about the movies that scare them. And I love a good horror movie, so I wanted to provide you all with a watch guide to things that go bump in the night. And, some people are thinking about losing some sleep. Some people want something gory and messy, and I've got you covered. Not like bloody. I mean, for reals. First off, good for you if you've even seen half of these, but maybe you've never seen the movies on this list and you're looking for something new, and I hope that you enjoy this list, and maybe I give you something good to watch this Halloween. So we have a lot of subcategories of horror to get through, so let's jump in with our first category, slasher films. Slashers are a bit of a difficult one, and to be honest, I'm not a big slasher guy, really, but you can't go wrong with the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre from Tobe Hooper. This one sets itself apart because it's honestly not that gory, not super violent, but it does a great job with the atmosphere and showing you just enough to get your imagination going. Next up, let's talk about supernatural horror. Whatever. Plenty of great options out there, honestly, in supernatural horror. But this year, I want to go with Hereditary, directed by Ari Aster. For those of you that want to lose sleep, this one will surprise you, and it's a great ride the whole way through. For something more unsettling, that recommendation will come later in this episode. Now, while we're talking about supernatural things, movies about curses are certainly supernatural adjacent, but different enough that it has its own section here, and this year I'm going with It Follows, written and directed by David Robert Mitchell. The looming paranoia, the soundtrack reminiscent of anything John Carpenter, and one specific, really great scare. I adore this movie. When I have something spooky to write, I'll usually put on the excellent soundtrack by Disaster Piece. Let's get a little in our heads and go for a psychological horror movie. This is a peculiar genre to discuss because a great deal of movies fit into this slot, but I decided to go with a modern classic, Get Out. Jordan Peele's one and only good and enjoyable horror movie. It's a crowd pleaser for sure, so you can easily throw this one on if you need a solid, middle-of-the-road spook. Not all horror movies are created equal, and pacing is certainly something to consider. If you want to make a night out of it and pick a nice, slow burn, something that builds the tension to a satisfying climax, we're talking about Alien from Ridley Scott. Almost more sci-fi suspense than horror, since Ridley Scott doesn't even consider this a horror movie, but it will deliver some good chills and enough what the fuck moments at all the right, unsuspecting moments. Of course, we do have to go old school and pick our cult classic, and for that, it feels almost necessary to pick Sam Raimi's Evil Dead 2. Forever at the top of many a horror fan's list, this one is equal parts gory, goofy, and inventive. Honestly, for such a low-budget flick, Evil Dead 2 paved the way for plenty of movies in its path in the teen horror and woodsy movies, one of which made my watch list. After our cult classic category, it seems fitting also to have a remake on this list as well, and for that, I'm staying in the same vein, and I'm choosing the 2013 remake of Evil Dead. While most remakes and sequels so many years later fall flat from their conception, Fede Alvarez jumps in with both feet on a direct remake that takes from the original while making it his own to unsettle and disturb just enough to set itself apart and still make it on my list. Next up, we've got vampire movies. Some really solid options here, but I'm going to go with my all-time favorite, 1985's Fright Night, directed by Tom Holland. Obviously, a different Tom Holland. A little silly and goofy at times, but for all of the lightheartedness of Charlie Brewster losing his cool, the drama and effects go hard, and it pays off. And also, Chris Sarandon couldn't be more menacing in this movie. Now, teen horror is a league all on its own. Not many of these are made anymore. Correction, not many good ones are made anymore, so we're going to take it back to 2000 with Final Destination, directed by James Wong. I think this one falls by the wayside a lot because the franchise goes into ridiculous territory as fast as possible, but the original is still really damn good all these years later. Don't watch this before you get on a plane. It's strange and fun in a way that plays well. The franchise as a whole is pretty good too, especially the second and latest entries in the series. For you people that want a good religious-themed horror flick, I'm going to go with The Conjuring, directed by James Wan. I know it's a modern jump scare fest, but there are moments in it that play so damn well I had to put it on my list. Just from the musical swell in the opening titles, which instantly gives me goosebumps, the movie tells you it's going to work as hard as it can to deliver something good, and yeah, it's worth watching. Skip the rest of the franchise and its spin-offs, but the foundation is good, trust me. Okay, let's get into zombie territory. My all-time favorite zombie movie is George Romero's Day of the Dead. Go ahead, find me another movie in this genre where a zombie kills someone by shooting them, out of revenge. You can't. It hasn't been done since Romero, and that's because you can't do it now. It'd be too goofy, but back then, it was awesome. This movie is properly spooky, it's great. That being said, for the categories of horror comedy and comedy horror, zombie movies kept coming to mind. For the horror comedy that is horror that is also funny, I had to go with Return of the Living Dead, directed by Dan O'Bannon, a comical examination of the genre from one of the guys who started the whole damn thing. I'm not kidding. It was created by the other writer of Night of the Living Dead, John Russo, but he and Romero differed on where the series should go. Romero made the Dead series, and Russo founded the Living Dead series. And then, for comedy horror, being a horror movie that is first and foremost a comedy, I went with the indie flick Scout's Guide to the Zombie Apocalypse, directed by Christopher Landon. It's a very enjoyable and entertaining flick while still scratching the horror itch. Let's go to Europe and talk about some foreign movies. Let's trek to the OGs of weird horror, Italy. And it's gonna be Lamberto Bava's Demons. This one is weird and goes all out with some great atmosphere and gross shit. It also contains one of the greatest shots in any horror movie ever. Still hanging out in Europe, if we trek on over to France, we're going to pick Raw, directed by Julia Ducournau. I don't know how to say that. This one is gross in its own way as it focuses on a vegan who becomes a cannibal, and it really shows what French directors can be capable of in the realm of, well, that person is fucked up. Let's see what they do next. We're going to hang out in France for one more category to grab our unsettling movie of the year. Martyrs, directed by Pascal it's a French name. Now, this is one of those movies that people will say you only watch once. Honestly, I'm not one of those people. I think I've seen this one 3 or 4 times, and I think it's incredible. Hard to watch? Absolutely. It's an examination of the cost of revenge, the obsession of the afterlife, and the toll trauma takes on a person. It's an astounding film that helped kick off the French extremism movement, whether Pascal thinks it did or not. This one is for a night in where you can't even hide your eyes. If you want unsettling, it's gotta be French or German. Now, if you have little ones and want just a fun movie for everyone, maybe you're hosting a party where kids will be present, you really can't go wrong with Monster House by Gil Kenan. It plays so well, it's fun, goofy, and it draws you in with likable characters and fun set pieces. But, if we're talking about alien movies, that's right, we're talking about not the Alien franchise. I'm going with 2017's It Chapter 1 by Andy Muschietti. Surprisingly solid, terrific music, great acting, even from the children, spooky shit. This is a great one for any horror fan, even if you're afraid of clowns. Not far from the Alien category is a monster flick, and we're gonna go with John Carpenter's The Thing. Maybe one of the best horror movies of all time, certainly my favorite, and one of the best suspense horror movies you could watch, expertly created by the father of modern horror. Amazing effects, great storytelling, this one is really gripping. If we want to talk gross, we're going to talk gore. And with gore, I'm going to go with Hostel. Either part 1 or 2. It kinda doesn't matter. Both are directed by Eli Roth. Personally, I'd vote for part 2, but they're definitely both gross in their own ways. Adjacent to gore, we have body horror. Now, I gotta be upfront and say I'm not a big fan of this subgenre. There's something about it that usually just doesn't play for me, but I'm gonna actually stay on the Eli Roth train and say Cabin Fever. I've seen it many times, including once when I had an actual fever, and that was an absolute mistake. I was miserable. And it has one of the funniest scenes involving a dude playing a harmonica getting hit in the face with a guitar. It's the party, man. I think I'm going to have to go watch this one now. Let's talk about a lesser enjoyed strain of horror. Folk horror. Again, honestly, not a subgenre I spend much time in, but this one has to go with The Witch, directed by Robert Eggers. Not just because it's got Anya Taylor-Joy and I adore her, but also the atmosphere and tone, and the weird shit goes so hard in this one, and it pays off in the climax so well. Careful, though, you may need subtitles if you're not well versed in ye olde English. Finally, we've arrived at a genre that is largely disappointing, rarely executed well, boring and predictable, but my introduction to found footage was smack in the middle of a franchise that was already up and running, and spooked me to the point where my friend Andrew and I stayed up the rest of the night watching happy movies. Andrew had asked me if I wanted to go see Paranormal Activity 3 in theaters, and I had said, "Why? They don't look good." And he was like, "Nah, man, they're scary. And, what if I spent the night at your house afterwards?" This was really funny to me, and I said, "You think we're gonna be that scared?" And then, after the movie ended, I nervously asked Andrew if he wanted to spend the night at my house. We actually watched the first 2 in the series, because I hadn't seen them, and then I think we watched The Grand Budapest Hotel to lighten the mood. So thank you, Andrew. Your recommendation made the list. Paranormal Activity 3, directed by Ariel Schulman and Henry Joost, is the best in the entire series, and is so creative with what it accomplishes, limiting itself to presenting the 80s and the tech from that era. It wound up being a blast. There you have it, my 23 recommendations for all kinds of horror movies to dive into this lovely spooky holiday. Remember, don't let your friends watch bad movies, and show up to the party with recommendations like the cool kid you never were. I did think about doing honorable mentions, but I think I'll leave those for next year. Thanks for listening to this episode of Movielover22. Feel free to leave a review, show this to your friends. You can email me at movielovershow@gmail.com. You can follow me on Letterboxd at movielovershow, and you can tell me what movies are on your list and that my choices are whack. Tune in next time when I talk about Are You Afraid of the Dark?